Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Liners, a series centered around key influencers and players in the performance marketing space. My name is Joey Liner, and I'm with Liner Connections. I'm your host. This week, I have a good old friend, Joe. Joe, please say hello.
What's up, folks?
And tell us your name, your background, your business, please.
You bet. Joey and I are Baltimore boys. My family calls me Joey, we've got that rocking. Full name Joe Mechlinski. I'm the CEO of Shift, which is a management consulting firm that's taken some twists and turns over the last 20 plus years. But fundamentally, we're trying to help people figure out this whole hybrid work thing.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So happy to have you on, man. Near and dear, as you know, we're both Baltimore boys. We People from Baltimore to have that edge. They have a lot of pride from being from Bmore, as we refer to it. And I had the great opportunity to have you enter my life in the mid 2000s when you did some sales consulting for us, and really helped me as one of the sales leaders just have a good understanding of what I need to do to expand my inside sales presence at Double Positive, and we were looking for that next chapter or evolution of our business and growth. And EntreQuest, which was big, which was your company, was a big part of that. But your videos, so some of my followers may know that I shared your TED Talk. I've shared some snippets from your current company, Shift, and we're going to talk about that, about the what's going on in the modern day workforce. I think it's really, I know somebody say Joe's not in performance marketing. Well, he is, because he helps touch the entire universe, and what he sees right now, I'm seeing in a lot of companies that I interact with in the performance marketing space, and I want to help. And I think listening to what Joe has here in the next 15, 20 minutes is going to be really helpful. So before we do that, though, give us a little background. What got you into sales consulting, or just in your, kicked you off in your professional career?
Yeah, well, I think Baltimore is a good way to start the story, which is just I grew up in the inner city on the other side of the tracks, and so I've been hustling since I was 13, and it wasn't to buy a fancy car; it was just to eat and survive. And as I sort of kept going as an adolescent, I was lucky enough to get to Hopkins and really parlay a lot of interesting business experience because back in the late 90s, the word entrepreneur wasn't even something that people talked about a lot.
Right.
And I just quickly understood that business was like sports in a lot of ways, right? It's how do you fit us human beings together, collaborate, work, really, really work hard, press the limits of what's possible. And then at the end of the day, like look up and see what the scoreboard says, and whether that's your profit and loss or your balance sheet, where you're going as a business. A lot of that seemed to make sense. But yet, when you think about business as a sport, a lot of ways we do it backwards. We don't treat people like people. We don't treat people like humans. And for me, 20 plus years ago, I was like, this is a wide open field to basically figure out when you look at the highest performing, really great environments like Google or Zappos or just other companies we look up to, they do the things that we like to talk about, which is, run this play and figure out how to really allow people to be people first. So we talk a lot about, how does the workplace more human, not less, is sort of the mantra and the rally cry.
Right on, man. Your energy got me like from day one when I first met you, because I knew, people say I'm a positive person. I have a good way to relate, but like you took me up like a whole different level, man. So I love that we got to work together when we were all glued to desks inside, but you helped us, even your interview styles or tactics or team exercises. I know you talked a little bit about that on your session Friday, but I still remember like the blindfolding experience. That was pretty cool when we had new hires and some of the tests we put them through. So tell us a little bit about Shift, like because you got involved with Shift, I think, like around before the pandemic, right, or pre-pandemic. That's when you rebranded your company, but like now, so maybe give us a little sense of what you were doing pre-pandemic and what you learned, obviously, through the pandemic, where you are today.
Well, 10 years ago, for those who don't know, the Baltimore Ravens beat the 49ers in the Super Bowl. And I took my dad down there, and beyond checking off that bucket list item, I also wrote a book, my first one. It came out, Grow Regardless. And it was a bit of another changing of my stars moment. The book hit #1 on Barnes and Noble for 3 days. I beat 50 Shades of Grey. It was a New York Times bestseller for both the week and the month. And at that point, we were a small, little McKinsey like. We did a lot of, like you said, working with startups and high growth companies. And at that point in time, right after that, we basically started working with big companies. And so we grew a nice boutique management consulting firm that worked with companies like John Hancock and New Balance and Microsoft to more or less help the executives figure out how to get their entire team on the same page. That was the play. And so we ran that all the way up until the pandemic. But then we had another thing happen, as we all know, which is, March 16th, 2020 was like the day everybody was allowed to work from home out of like nowhere. Like that was an option on the table. And we were sort of all looking at each other like, all right, well, let's now sort of transport that office environment back to the home environment. And for 2+ years, we've been all trying to figure that out. And it's not going so well. And it's not going well because a lot of things, one, it's, we're all fatigued from the pandemic. It's been more than just a pandemic, more than a health crisis, more than a mental health crisis. We've got just a lot of change happening in the system. Number two, what we used to do in the office, walk in the halls and seeing each other from a proximity standpoint, is just not happening. And not happening enough that we used to leverage a lot of what we saw with our own two eyes to sort of give us a sense, that radar, that sixth sense of like, well, who needs a hug today and who needs a lesson? Well, that's gone. And that serendipitous sort of connection, casual collisions that would happen was a big part of the culture. And Mr. Liner, better than anyone, because you're sort of the heartbeat of most organizations that I've had a chance to meet. I told you that, most really great companies have a heartbeat. They got a Joey Liner. And when you do, it's like, how do you scale that heart to the rest of the team and still hit your business goals and your results? And so, through the pandemic, we had kind of ups and downs, just like everybody did, and had their own story. And so we took this moment to kind of double down on our future, and we bought a small tech company. And it had the guts of a platform that we really think, and we rebuilt it last year to help a CEO get their entire team on the same page without scheduling more meetings. It's not a fun word to say, but asynchronous collaboration is the way out of this, because since the pandemic got going, we've been scheduling meetings to the tune of like 252% since the pandemic got going. So everybody's trying to figure out like, why is everybody burned out, or why? Because we're doing Zoom meetings all day. That's why. It's like TikTok brain is really what's been happening to us, which is like, we're just mindlessly scanning, scrolling. We're not present with each other. We've got a million tabs open, and we're all trying to find a way to interrupt the pattern and inspire each other to go. And it feels hard. And a lot of CEOs right now are struggling with, they're getting people to come back because it is not working in the way that everybody thinks, or frankly, like we talked about last week, like this is a moment to rally, folks. We finally got let out of prison, so to speak. What are we going to do about it? So there you go.
Dude, you hit on so many things that like it was for me, and this is no, knock to my previous company, DMS, but I was in that grind every day from, I was CLO executive, but I think this spread across the entire workforce where, like you said, back to back to back on Zooms, and, starting my own consulting business and just talking to so many different companies out there now in my space and dealing with their teams. I absolutely see different cultures, different attitudes, different perceptions of how they all interact. And I can tell you, man, like, I mean, obviously you see this firsthand, and that's why you're helping solve these issues. But I think a lot of leaderships are just naive, or they're not naive, but they're just kind of trying to plow through it. They're just trying to say business is normal. We got numbers to hit, whether you're publicly traded or not. They're just, they understand what you're talking about, but like it's just like hard for them to deal with it because they don't know how to deal with it. And I think so. It's really cool. Let's get into it, because I actually took some notes down from your session. One is, like you said, is I think we have too many meetings in today's workforce, right? Like, how do we try to change that culture today?
Well, we talked about this last week, which is everybody's got to take responsibility for their own work schedule, and so it's easy to say as a consultant on your end or a consultant on my end because we've kind of got that like that freelance or it's our world to sort of dictate. But I would say look, we work in big companies, and it's the first place I start, which is like, what's an ideal week look like for you? What is not an ideal week look like for you? How do you want to feel at the end of the day, and how don't you feel? Like if you don't start there and then really start to sort of reverse engineer, well, then what does that look like from, what days do I do meetings? What days don't I do meetings? And it sounds like a Stephen Covey time management exercise. And I would just say this is less about time management and it's more about energy management, which is just simply saying what's feeding me and what's depleting me. And I think right now, that's the first place. We can go through like a meeting cleanse, a meeting
Yeah.
purge, and that's cool. You can zero
Yeah.
based budget that thing back up.
Yeah.
At the end of it, it's like a question of like, what's your digital manifesto? Like, what's the way that your organization is taking this new terrain? Because, when we worked in a physical structure, there's this great quote by Churchill. He said, "We shape buildings and then they shape us." So the fact that this isn't a BlackBerry with QWERTY keyboard, it shapes the way we use it simply by the design. So that design thinking we used from an architecture perspective inside of buildings, but we haven't done that digitally. And so we're now traversing time and space. If you've got a global team, it's going to take a little bit more energy. And so our philosophy is build it from the ground up, build it by individual to individual. What is it going to do? What does the week need to be in order for them to be their very best? And then collectively, how do we collaborate? How do we use this new freedom within a framework? So it's not about remote only. It's about finding a hybrid solution that's really going to work for people, so they don't have a 52-minute commute each way, which was what we were doing before the pandemic.
I know, right?
Just unless we forget.
Right. Especially that Baltimore DC traffic.
Yeah.
We need to listen better, right? Like, so tell us, we're not, what are you observing out there in that realm?
I think we're like teenagers with a credit card, spending our time in a real not thoughtful way. We're just over scheduling ourselves and meetings in a way that like, look, I've got a couple tabs open as I'm talking to you, and I'm really focused on this conversation. But like, what if I get distracted? What if my phone goes off? What if like all of these things take away from the depth of a conversation? And so, what I would say is, starting with again the individuals, and then like, how can we just check in and make sure that we're being present? Like we started our webinar with you guys last week and said, hey, what's preventing you from being 100% present right now? Like,
Here.
just open up with a question, because if you're not opening up with a question, it's like TikTok brain. You're just going to be scanning, scrolling, and skimming, as opposed to like actively getting on the field and playing in a conversation with someone versus just like, you know, hear no evil, see no evil.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Open up, ask a good question, and then just let them talk, right? And so you know that we're here, we're present, we're here today, and we're actively engaged in what this meeting is going to be about in this discussion, which leads me to my next point too, or your next point, which was, I think we need to give back something, right? Like we should look at uh, how we can make this culture better. And you brought up some really good topics there too. So I'll let you take the lead on that.
Well, look, I think at the end of the day, you've got to be willing as leaders. So what's the issue right now is that we're still stuck. And if I could give like one pill after doing this for 20 years to every one of us, it would be to take some more self-awareness pill, right? Which is just to understand what you're going through is not what others are going through, right? Number one. Number two, you can't project your shit on other people. And so just because you feel super productive doesn't mean that they are. So stop assuming anything. Assume nothing. Go in with curiosity, not judgment. Go in with the idea that we're all doing the very best we can, and sometimes it's not good enough. So that doesn't mean that the person's wrong or bad, but I will tell you, clarity, as Brene Brown, is kindness. And so the question is, what does good look like for your business this week? Does everyone know that? Does everybody know what good looks like for the month? Does everybody know what good looks like in their role? Right. And at the end of the day, realize that people are transacting their time for your mission, your company. And so this is not the days of people working for the same company for 20 and 30 years. It's not that loyalty is out the door. It's just that, folks, we've reached a point of evolution where we don't have to work, we get to work. And that notion, as you know, is a really big one for me, which is like just waking people up to the choice that Monday is a choice. And so if
Yeah.
you can lead from that place, I think what happens is people sort of get that sense of an inner knowing that they just know they can trust you because you're leading from a place of humanity. Look, at the end of the day, when we hear a song that just lights us up, right? The song Imagine from the Beatles, like you hear that, you don't think for a second it's not like one of the world's greatest poems, writing songs that were ever written. And it's because you got it from somewhere else. It's something that we all deeply know is true. When we're fronting, when we're faking, or we're being phony or inauthentic, or we're saying it's just business, that's just an excuse to be a jerk. And everybody knows
Yeah.
it. So time to
Yeah.
get the update. Stop fucking around.
Yeah, man. By the way, my wife sent me this yesterday. I thought it was perfect time for our session together. I thought I'd read it to you here. Toxic teams try to keep track of remote workers by adding more meetings. Transactional teams try to keep track of each other on email. Transformational teams track themselves against clear goals, outcomes, and accountability.
Yeah.
That's Greg McKeown. So
Okay.
yeah, no, I think you just, it's really cool. And if you can, like, I know the purpose isn't just commercial for Shift, but like, tell us some ways that we need to interact better. Because I do think anyone in my contacts that wants to learn more and reach out to Joe, we'll easily set that up. But how does Shift help management teams interact better with their workforce?
Well, look, just like in school, the teacher teaches to the C student. They teach to the problems. They don't spend a lot of time with the A's. They spend a little bit more time with the B's. And we're all trying to figure out how to create more A students, but we're not asking the A's what the hell the A's are doing. So you're making an assumption that the A's are doing what you used to do when you were in that role, or that the A's are really good at communicating, right? Michael Jordan wasn't the best coach in the world because he couldn't unpack the process of how to shoot the ball.
Right.
So, look, it's not just about hiring a consultant. I mean, I get the whole adage of like hiring a consultant, them grabbing your watch and telling you what time it is. But in some ways, you got to think about this in the context of like, okay, what's the extra set of hands? What are the extra set of eyes that we need to be really effective right now? And sometimes it's hard to read the label on the jar you're in. So I think if you're kind of in a moment where you feel stuck between, should I use more carrot? Should I use more stick? I'm not sure how to engage people. We're moving slower than we've ever moved before. I would say it's a good time to say, okay, stop. Let's figure out not how to stop the business, because I will tell you, in the
Yeah.
last 2 or 3 years, everybody's like, oh, we got to go, 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 go.
Yes.
And I would say that old, racing adage, which is like, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. We got to get down to a smooth place with the business. So it has a cadence, it has a rhythm. People know what to expect on Mondays, know what to expect the first week of March. If your people don't know what to sort of expect, then they're not psychologically safe. They're not clear on what good looks like, and they're not going to operate in a place that's going to really unlock discretionary effort in a way that we used to when we used to gather. And so I do think listening, both with surveys, pulse surveys. We have AI on top of our platform right now.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about ChatGPT and it being a
Right.
great first draft partner. Awesome.
Right.
What about using AI though? Just like you use Waze. Waze helps you sense where to go and where not to go. That's what our platform does. It's going to help you sort of sense like who, again, needs a little bit more support, who doesn't, and how do I get messages out that really matter and resonate without going, okay, here's another weekly huddle, here's another weekly meeting, here's another thing. We got to pull everybody together. We got to get everybody on the same page. It's like, no, you got to build the muscle of asynchronous digital collaboration. It's the world that we're going to live in, folks, for at least the next decade. Remember when emotional intelligence was all the rage back 20
Yes.
years ago when we did work together? You're like, oh my God, like this thing came out about 10 years ago, which it did. Martin Seligman started the positive psychology movement. Then Danny Goleman wrote this book around emotional intelligence. And then 10 years later, 2005, 2006, everybody was talking about emotional intelligence. We're there now with digital emotional intelligence. Right? If your team sends a note or a Slack message, like what's the response time? What's the etiquette? What's the dress
Yeah.
code? What's the
Yes.
digital leadership presence that you want to be? Because just like there was value in visibility when we were in person. You'd show up, you'd look good, you'd walk the halls. Well, how does that look now? I'm not, I'm not like a big fan of using emojis and things like that, but I know that silence is a killer from a digital
Yeah.
collaboration perspective. And so there's got to be a way to set better expectations, but also have value in the visibility that you have digitally with your team.
Amen. And I think if you continue to dig yourself deeper and deeper into a hole if you don't address it. If you just assume that stuff's going to fix itself, and the HR has to be able to have a better interaction with their team and with the staff. So, dude, thank you so much. Before I let you go, first of all, it's crazy. 10 years ago, we were in the Super Bowl and we won. That was awesome. Number two, it's cool that your book was on the top of the bestseller list ahead of 50 Shades of Grey.
For 3 days, just to be clear. I don't want to set the wrong
Hey,
story.
man, that's all that
But
matters.
I've got the
But
screenshot to prove it. So
that's awesome, dude. But seriously, though, I think even on my own feed, your TED Talk got a lot of. It just, I think it was one of the top views just in general with your like. Uh, it's awesome. Like, what does it feel to have a TED Talk that has one of the top views out there?
listen, I have just like everybody, TED, I think is a really amazing conference, meeting, gathering, sort of philosophy. And the founder, just so I can get this out, is Richard Saul Wurman.
Yeah.
He founded this thing back in 1984, and he was a topographer. He was a cartographer. He was an architect. He trained under Frank Lloyd Wright and Frank Gehry. He's going to shoot me if I get this wrong. So he was one of the first guys to put like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates together. The idea was to subtract the podium, the PowerPoint, the expert in front of the room, the hour talk. So his innovation concept was stripping it away down to the bare bones. Now he sold that concept back in 2004 to Chris Anderson. Chris has since, taken to a different place and a different space. But for me, I'd always thought about it. And I remember when TEDx first came out in 2006 and 2007, I've got a crazy bad audition sitting on YouTube somewhere. And then just by happenstance, quickly, I met Richard Saul Wurman back in 2015. So I've known him for 8 years. He's 87. He's written 91 books, brother. And the guy's fucking brilliant. And he just has this very unique way of like, it's got a Rick Rubin feel, which is like, he's like, look, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I know what I like. And I'm very certain about what I like. And so I kind of took some of that into the TED Talk in this way, which is I didn't give any advice. Like I wanted this to be a TED Talk that was not about you looking up for the answers about what the future of work is. This is about you looking in the mirror. What say you, right? And so that, was really cool to put out there. It was really neat. You're the first person that really will get the Easter egg sitting at the end of the TED Talk. I put Richard Saul Wurman's name in there. He belongs to be in there. He's an amazing person. And look, it was a lot of this kind of just happened and unfolded. It dropped in August. We got, it was the most watched August for a week. It was only after a week in August. So my point is like it got traction pretty quick. And like everything, there's a bit of a game and there's a bit of a thing going on in the background in terms of just, continuing to get it to the right group so that they can see this thing. But look, at the end of the day, man, I think our message has been very clear for 20 years, which is we don't know more than you do. We certainly don't know more than you about your team. And we don't know what's good for you. You do. The question is, how do we help you unlock that without sounding like a new age spiritual, revival? How do you put it into practical management that, really does work for the organization, for the stakeholder, the shareholder, for the people that are there, for the clients, for the community? That's the sweet spot.
Well said, dude. Well said. How can people get in touch with you? I think there's a lot of companies that are going to be intrigued to learn more. You've done a great job. Like I said, your session last week was awesome, but how can new potential companies engage with you guys?
So listen, we put out a lot of content. If you check out my profile on LinkedIn, there's almost something up there daily that people can kind of click into and just sort of see. Like you'll know by reading our content whether this is like, if it's not like a hell yeah, I can't wait to read more, hear more, or learn more, then I would say you're not a good fit. You'll just know. You'll know with the way that our team communicates. You can go to shiftthework.com for the name of the business, where the name of the company is Shift. The name of our platform is Latch, and again, the whole idea is like, how do you latch your team in
Yeah.
for the week and make them feel like, again, they're seen, heard, and understood. But more importantly, you as the CEO are seen, heard, and understood. Because I will tell you, the CEO, the executive suite, it's never been harder. And I would say right now, getting help is not a bad thing, and raising your hand and just trying to figure out like what really is going to move the needle for your team, because this was hard before the pandemic. It's real freaking hard right now.
Amen, dude. Thank you. Yes, I look forward to seeing some of my followers connect. Real quick, Super Bowl prediction: Chiefs or Eagles?
Eagles, easy.
I'm Eagles too, man. I'm Eagles
Yeah,
too.
Eagles are going to win, and I think it's just their year. I think you can feel a little Baltimore momentum behind them. You know, it's like
Yep.
we haven't done this yet, and so anyway, that'd make the better story. No offense.
Yeah. And my wife's from Philly, so I have no
There you
choice.
go.
But great to see you, brother. Thank you for spending your time with us. And I look forward, like I said, to doing more work with you as well. So I'll see you
Yeah,
soon,
man.
bro. All right,
Thank you,
man.
Joe.
Bye.